right, good afternoon. Welcome to our third session on modern PBL. We're going to be looking at how to enhance your project-based learning classroom with some pretty innovative strategies. We're not going to go extremely in depth on these. We're going to kind of just introduce them so that you know that there are definitely some ways to really elevate what you're doing in your classroom. And give some examples as to how you could do those. What are those strategies, and how can you make the most of them? So part 3, again, we're looking at immersive experiences. We're going to also be looking at flipped learning and how that can be combined with project-based learning, AI, and how that is going to enhance a project-based learning classroom, as well as how to bring the community into our classroom to really make things real and relevant for our students. I love this quote by Einstein. He said, "I never teach my pupils. I only attempt to provide them the conditions in which they can learn." And that is very, very true in a project-based classroom. One of the things I wanted to do is give you guys an inside look as to how I use a lot of the technology, whether that's artificial intelligence, virtual reality, augmented reality within my classroom. I actually had the opportunity to have ABC News out of Cleveland, Ohio, come to my classroom, and they videoed and interviewed students. So I want to show you what that actually looks like in a classroom to give you a real sense of, one, this is doable, and what it really looks like.
Use of artificial intelligence is growing in our everyday lives. It's already having a big impact on education. I visited a school in Mansfield to see how AI is being used in the classroom.
I'm going to get class started, and we'll go from there.
This isn't your average social studies class, or at least not the type of social studies class we had.
Correct. Correct. It's very unique in that there's a lot of technology that's brought into the classroom, and I try to make it as relevant to their lives and the future that they're heading into.
At the Richland School of Academic Arts, teacher Dan Jones is using AI technology to transform students' learning experience.
Students are working at their own pace, which doesn't mean no pace. It just means that if it takes a student a little longer to get through notes, that's okay. They're processing information at a pace that matches their needs.
Students are learning about the Revolutionary War using something similar to ChatGPT and virtual reality.
To be able to see a picture of George Washington at Valley Forge is very different than just reading about.
So you're making learning fun.
I'm trying. Definitely trying.
8th graders Ava Lively and Zaya Brown are already seeing the benefits of AI-assisted learning. What do you think about it?
It's amazing. It helps me a lot with my projects. It helps me write out my summaries better.
While AI can make the learning process a little easier, there are questions about students using the technology to cheat on their schoolwork.
The way that the AI works, it doesn't just provide them with an answer, which has been a concern of many educators, is that when AI comes into the classroom, all of a sudden the kids don't have to do anything. It can just produce the writing for them or produce all the answers. And the AI that we're using is different.
Mr. Jones programmed school AI to provide details and ask follow-up questions to help students build critical thinking skills. The technology helps students complete their assignments at home.
So a lot of times students have to wait until they get to class to be able to ask whatever questions they had about the content that was being covered. This gives them an opportunity to ask essentially a virtual teacher those questions, and they can get immediate clarification on that information before they ever get to class.
But that has some teachers concerned about job security.
It doesn't replace me, which is one of those fears that I do know a lot of teachers have, is that AI is going to replace the teacher. And so I still have the opportunity to guide and direct students through the learning process, even though they have that additional tutor or resource there.
Mr. Jones encourages educators to get more comfortable with AI because it's not going away.
As we evolve in education, technology is going to evolve, and we have to be willing to embrace that and not necessarily fight it or
stop it from happening because our students are already engaged in that technology, and we need to learn how we can work with that and make things relevant to them.
Ohio is one of 11 states preparing policy guidance for K through 12 schools on artificial intelligence platforms like ChatGPT. It's unclear when those guidelines will be released, but what I loved walking into this classroom is you could really see that the students were looking forward to going to class, knowing they were going to do things a little bit differently than they do in their other classes.
They're all about the technology, the young kids. I can only imagine what this would have been like when we were in school, like how it enhanced our education.
I know.
Yeah, so they're lucky.
Yeah, they're really enjoying this, and I think they're learning a lot from it.
That's awesome.
All right, so that just gives you a quick look at my classroom and how that technology is actually being used by students. So one of the first things that we're going to really touch on is immersive experiences and why these are so important within a PBL classroom, because they do create dynamic learning environments. Students are not just sitting by and having education done to them. They get to experience the education that they're being presented with. They are a part of what is happening in the classroom. They get to actively participate. They get to inquire and really apply that information, the content that they're learning, so that they can take some serious ownership of the learning experience. And it's not just the sophistication of the tools, because there are immersive tools and then there are immersive experiences. And one of the things that is really important is to give our students immersive experiences beyond just the tools, so that it becomes real for our students. So the question that I really want you to think about is, how have you experienced or observed the transition from traditional instruction to immersive learning in your own educational context? And when you have students who are able to sit down and truly experience the learning, when you give them an opportunity to participate in a simulation, how does that really enhance the learning that's going on in your classroom beyond just a traditional, whether that's lecture or worksheet sort of activity? How does setting something up like this truly change the dynamics within your classroom? So part of the learning material, students actually get to step in and engage. My daughter, she had the opportunity to study about the Titanic, and her teacher transformed the classroom into the Titanic. She had, the smokestacks hung from the ceiling. She had tables set up within a barrier that looked like the ship, and each student then had their own little card about them as a passenger, and it had a story. So it brought everything that they had been studying about the Titanic to life. And they got to have a tea party and really engage in a hands-on experience. So they got to act out what they had been studying. And this can easily be done even in math, and having students act out story problems. Make the story real for your students. So actively participating in historical events, you can see here is a set of tea that I used for my students as we were studying the Boston Tea Party. I ordered in all of the various flavors of tea that were thrown overboard during the Boston Tea Party, because I wanted my students to experience the different types of teas that were drank in colonial America. And I wanted them to understand in a very real sense what it was like to be a colonial American. And they all had little cards that explained different roles of individuals who participated in those events. So it took everything that we had been studying about colonial America and the events leading up to the American Revolution, and it made it real. They got to eat foods that they had that had been served during that time. They drank the tea that had been served during that time. And they really got to connect with the information that we were studying. Because when students are able to make that authentic connection, all of a sudden, when they go to apply information to a project, it's more real. They have a deeper understanding, a more internal connection with that content, so that when they go out to apply, this is an authentic application. It's real for them. And that reality is connected to memories, because experiences are just that. They're solidified memories that we have connected to the content. So I've also had the opportunity to, when we were studying fairy tales, I dressed up as Grumpy the dwarf from Snow White. And so as students were reading, I was in character and I was grumpy with them, and they really had to think about, is this my teacher or what are we experiencing here? Because I tried to make it authentic and really bring to life what we were studying. And it's something that students will never forget. They'll never forget having tea on the Titanic, or when Grumpy was their teacher.
Dan, can I give you an example of what our school did? Two things that we did.
Absolutely.
Okay, so one thing we did, which is really good for, it would be good for 5th grade on up, I think, and I think your students would like this, is we did a thing where the kids came over through Ellis Island, and they were different people, and they would have to go through the different stations, and some people were rejected, right? Just like on Ellis Island. And it was very emotional for the kids to go through that, because we had a whole bunch of kids, and some said, why are they rejecting me? Why can I not stay on the island? So that was one thing. And then this spring, I mean, I'm up in Michigan. This spring, we have a number of people who participate in the Iditarod. So because we have so much snow up here, we had a dog sled, and the kids, we did all kinds of things with the dog sled, and we tracked the Iditarod. But the kids got to ride a dog sled and talk about how they would pack it. And it was very realistic because we have lots of snow, so they know how it works with the dog sled and stuff. But it was really good for the kids to talk about how they pick up their food and where they stop and why they have to rest with their dogs and stuff like that. So that's a unique experience, but the Ellis Island one would work for anybody. And I think it'd be a great thing for 5th grade on up.
Absolutely. And again, it's just about bringing whatever it is they're studying and making it real. So even when we were studying the impact of the Roman Catholic Church on Europe, and we were looking at things such as, just different aspects that the Catholic Church was starting to implement to be able to raise money, indulgences, for instance, and creating an actual experience for students to engage in that sort of experience makes it real, unforgettable, and something that now I know how to apply this in a much deeper level, in a more intimate level, when it comes to their projects. So, I mean, if your students have experienced, an Ellis Island, simulation, and then they go to talk to someone whose family has immigrated to America, all of a sudden they have a much deeper understanding of what that experience would have been like for the people that they're interviewing and the stories that they're trying to tell. So when we look at this, I broke this down in the book, and I said, there's immersive education. We have immersive classrooms, but there's content, and then there's technology. And things such as virtual reality or augmented reality, those are technology pieces that help bring to life the experiences or the content that we have going on. Now, you can have immersive content without the technology. Just having students sit down and have, a Boston tea party where they're drinking the tea, that involved zero technology. I didn't have to have a computer in the room, and they still got a ton out of it. But if you can transport students virtually to an environment, fantastic. That's an entirely another level of experience that allows the content to be solidified to apply it to a project. So an example, I have a hyperdoc here. It's a Google Earth activity in which my students were studying Florence, Italy, and the impact that Florence had on the Renaissance. And what I knew I wasn't able to do was take my students on a field trip to Florence. That just wasn't going to be in the cards. That wasn't a possibility. But I could transport my students via Google Earth. And so on this hyperdoc, which is just a basic Google Doc that has hyperlinks or links already embedded within the document, and all the students had to do was click on it, and it would open up Google Earth, transport my students to a specific location in Florence, Italy, and allow them to look around and explore. Because that visual, just seeing a picture of Florence isn't the same as being able to feel like you're standing there. And I do have a couple different VR headsets within my classroom. One does access Google Earth, so students can literally stand inside of the Santa Maria del Fiore and look around. They're still in my classroom, but they feel like they are there. And it gives them a different perspective, a different understanding of the grandness of what we're studying. And to be able to walk on the streets of Florence and look around and see the shops, see how close buildings are and how a lot of the buildings look exactly the same, especially from a top-down perspective. They can see, wow, the architecture, there's a very unique architecture in that region. And so it brings the content to reality for our students when we can include some sort of engagement, immersive engagement, that a traditional, just taking notes over a topic can't. So I did include that Florence, Italy document in here so that you can access that and you can see kind of how that's laid out. And all students would do, they would access the links, they would be able to then type in the document and then submit that document to me so I can see what their observations were and to see what it was, that they found interesting. How did it resonate with them? So again, virtual reality, augmented reality, those are all tools, whether it's a MetaQuest 3 or an HTC Vive, which a lot of times those are high dollar items for classrooms. The only way I was able to get them was through a grant. I learned how to write grants, and that became just standard practice for my classroom, because if there was something that I wanted, I needed to be able to write a grant to do so, to get that for my students. So what does it all have to do with PBL? Well, it allows students to apply the concepts they've learned in practical situations. These are meaningful experiences for students, and they get to not just learn about the Boston Tea Party, they get to sit down and have tea with their peers. So this is a practical application. And like I've shared before in regards to the types of projects, I had students that made tea sets to represent what we were studying in class. So again, building those constant connections between what we're learning and how to apply that information. So we talked about this last time, and it's a lot of those feedback loops, the journaling entries, think, pair, share, allow students to really have those conversations, because conversations are really, really important within a PBL classroom, and to give them those opportunities to say, you know what, this is what I got out of it. This is why it was meaningful to me. This is what I learned during this experience. And then to really just have those conversations between teachers and students and looking at, what did they get from this? How can we make it more meaningful for them? Allow students to do those self-assessments, those learning logs, whether it's done in actual handwritten journal form or through a Google Doc or, some sort of survey, but allow them to have that personal reflection. it truly, it does make it real. And the more we can model what it is the students are studying, the more likely they are to internalize and then apply appropriately the things that have been covered in class to their projects. We've just made it real. So this document here, it's all about how to plan for an immersive activity. It looks at, this is the standard that we're trying to teach. This is what it is we're trying to cover. What is it that I want to achieve? What is the outcome? And then determining, what are the hands-on activities? Do I want it to just be hands-on, or do I want it to be technology driven? Is there some sort of middle ground where I can combine the two? And how am I going to check on student mastery during this immersive experience? It is important that we, still check to make sure that students are making appropriate connections. It's not just a fun event for the students, but it's a fun, meaningful event. And how do we make sure that they're making those connections appropriately during the experience? Are there certain modifications that we need to make? So just knowing your students, knowing your classroom, what modifications will you need to make? What pre-teaching would you need to do in order to set students up for success during the experience? What sort of outcome will it have on future learning? Is there, a reflection? I would definitely build in reflection pieces, whether that's your own reflection on how it went, or, whether that's student reflection, but making sure that there is a reflection piece, because this is something you're going to want to come back to. Because if you intend to do this maybe next year because it worked really well, what are some revisions that you would do? And then using that student feedback, because you may have thought it went great, but the students maybe didn't necessarily care for it as much. Because there are things that are on my radar that I think it was brilliant, but it didn't resonate as well with students. And so making sure that we have that feedback is really, really important. So you can either scan this document, or I do have, my traditional Google Doc that has all the various links in it that will have a link to this document as well. So I'll put that in the chat. So flipped learning. Flipped learning and PBL. This is something that I am extremely passionate about, because it did help save my career. I have been flipping my class for, I would say, 12 years. I think it's 11, 12 years, might even be 13 at this point. But flipped learning, it is a meta strategy. So if you think of, buying an iPad, you bought an iPad, and then you have different apps that run on that iPad. Well, flipped learning would be the iPad itself. PBL would be an app that's running on that iPad. So flipped learning is going to enhance what can be done in a PBL setting. So I love this John Dewey quote: if we teach today as we taught yesterday, we're going to rob our children of tomorrow. We have to understand that the strategies that we used 15, 20 years ago are not necessarily going to resonate and work nearly as well with modern day students. Their needs have changed. And we need to be able to meet our students' needs as best as we possibly can. So just doing something because that's the way it's always been done, it's the way that we were taught, is not necessarily what is best for the students who are sitting right in front of us. And we need to evolve in how we teach to best meet their needs. And flipped learning is definitely a way to do that. So with flipped learning, we have to ask that question: what is the best use of my face-to-face time with my students? Is the best use of my time lecture? Or is the best use of my time actually working one-on-one with a student? or with a group of students, navigating a room, checking for understanding what is the best use of your face-to-face time. And we see a difference between active learning and passive learning. The whole sit and get model, where students just sit there and we hope that they understand what it is we're sharing with them. They don't have to do anything. There's no actual ownership of that. They can sit there and disengage entirely, disassociate with the entire classroom, or we can make them active participants in the classroom. And flipped learning does that. It makes them an active participant within the classroom. What I do is I record my instruction, and my students access that instruction on their own. They're able to pause, they can rewind, they can go at a pace that matches their learning. And I tell my students this story all the time, that when I was in high school, I was always the student who was raising my hand, asking the teacher to slow down so I could get all of the notes that they were taking, because they were using an overhead with a transparency. And I would usually be given the transparency so that the teacher could continue on. But I was the one that was, sitting in the back, mortified that I was holding the class back and everything. Well, now my students can pause me, take notes at their own pace, not feel self-conscious about the pace in which they take notes. They can make little drawings as they go. They can do what needs to be done to best meet their learning needs. They don't have to try to keep up with me. They don't have to keep up with their peers. It's all about an instruction that's personalized to your student. And I move that outside of the classroom because the students don't need my presence in order to take notes. They don't need me to be right beside them while they do that. They can do that on their own, and it builds a sense of independence for your students. They're able to take some ownership in that process, and they could even highlight things that they have questions on that they would like to be able to address in class. And so that makes our time, our face-to-face time, much more meaningful than if it were spent with me just instructing and lecturing. It doesn't mean that there's never time to go back over content that's been covered with your students or in small groups. That's not what this means, but it does mean that students are able to work at different paces within your classroom, and it all functions well. Because a student who is absent now isn't missing your lecture. They can go back and access the content that was covered in class and never miss a beat. And especially if they know that they're going to be gone, they can still access that content and come to class prepared. And they can meet the task at hand. They can still engage in class and feel like they haven't missed anything, because they're still a part of the instruction that's happened. They're still able to access it. And like I said, true differentiation does occur, because if it takes you a little longer to take notes than somebody else, that's been differentiated for you by you. It's not even something that I've had to do for every single student. They get to differentiate how they take notes, the pace at which they take notes. And as you saw in the video at the very beginning, one of the things I say is students are able to work at their own individual paces. It just doesn't mean no pace. There needs to be progress being made. So they can work at their own pace as long as they're still hitting a lot of those deadlines, because that's a reality. That's a real world experience of hitting deadlines, making sure things are done on time. It could take you much longer to get that task done, but you have to be able to time manage and prioritize and figure out how it is you're going to get that project done on time. But it doesn't necessarily have to all be done at the exact same time, the exact same way, with their peers. So moving that instruction piece outside of the classroom gives me more time in the classroom for that direct application, more time in the classroom to have those one-on-one conversations, more time for me to check in and really see how students are progressing through their projects and really touch base with students. So those micro conversations are much more doable within a flipped classroom. So it really elevates what we're able to do by giving us the time to actually do it. So like I said, you've got the time. So this now allows you to invest in each student. You get to know them personally. You can address misunderstandings because you're having those micro conversations, and you get to solve problems together. This isn't, I mean, there are lots of times where students, they'll come to me and they'll be like, Mr. Jones, I don't know how to apply this particular topic to my project. How do I work that in there? And then we can sit and we can process that together. And really, they learn how to collaborate. So you have the time to invest in those components of your classroom that are necessary within a PBL classroom. We now have more time to do in-class activities. There's more time to do that direct application, whether that's through a game, like we talked about in our session last week, or through whole group discussions, to be able to allow students to just come in and converse and discuss what it was that they learned and how their project is going. It allows so much more of a rich classroom experience than for them to just be in a sit and get environment. So, question to think about: how do you currently use your time for learning or teaching? And how might the flipped learning model alter your balance between acquiring foundational knowledge and the engagement of those higher level Bloom's tasks? So something to really think about, what could the flipped aspect do for your classroom? How much more time could you dedicate to a project? Because Lois, I know you had mentioned previously about how much time a project should take, and really looking at, the amount of time we spend on a project. Well, if we move a lot of the instruction outside of that, how much more time do you have to engage in the project components and the development of those projects and figuring out misconceptions or misunderstandings and things like that, that we really can alleviate a lot of that stress or a lot of the misunderstandings that we need to be able to move forward on the projects. So Lois, you said, I spend a lot of time on projects. We do a lot of hands-on because I use the flip model. And that is an incredible thing. I know, that's part of our connection is flipped learning, and the fact that, you flip, I know you have a different experience with flip learning than maybe what I do, but that's, what makes a lot of what we do possible is because we now have time. Can you share a little bit about your experience with flipped learning?
So I have been using Flip Learning probably as long as you have been, if not longer, because I worked with John Bergman on some stuff. I've used it in high school settings, but I've also used it in lower settings since I'm a K through 12 teacher. And I just find if I'm doing the high school kids, I use a lot of video stuff. But if I'm doing it with the younger students, I try to really have it so that the kids are engaged in activities. And then I don't really do video with the younger students so much like I've done with the older kids, but I give them opportunities to be engaged in some way in the content other than just talking at them. So it may be a center for younger students so that they can engage in the content in some way. So they're with their peers. Sometimes we do peer stuff, but then they go right back around and turn into an activity or a lab. So I have to really vary it depending on the age of the students. Some people do use videos. I know with younger students, I traditionally have not because some of my students don't engage in that video work so much. I know teachers who've done that down to second grade, but I've chosen not to do that over the years. It just and it also depends on my students. You know, I have to see what works for them. Even some high school kids don't always do well with some of the video things that I have, or they don't particularly like my videos. So maybe I'll use somebody else's video because that seems to assist them. Some people are really good at producing video. I mean, I've been doing video for a long time. I have my own YouTube channel, but and I used it a lot during COVID. But it just kind of depends on the nature of the student and what my classrooms are like, and of course, what I'm trying to teach at the moment. I hope that helps.
Absolutely. And there are different variations of a flipped classroom. So, and I think you kind of spoke to both of them. One's called an in-flip, where a lot of that instruction happens still in the classroom, but it's still independent, where students can still engage, whether that's through stations or, a student may be working at a different pace and they want to go ahead and access, content that's going to be covered tomorrow. And they want to go ahead and get started on that, because then that they know that gives them more time to work on their project on the back end of things, or, on the next day, when typically we may be working through the mastery of understanding. They're able to work on the application of their understanding.
One thing I do like to do, and again, it depends on the student, is, and I don't use it all the time because then it kind of loses this sense of excitement, but breakout rooms are just so amazing for kids for content. And it's a way to understand the content without the video and being able to go around, and however you set up your breakout room, doesn't make any difference what age, you can do it with any age. Again, I don't use it all the time because then it's kind of, the kids kind of, oh, we're doing that again. But every once in a while, they'll say, can we do a breakout room? And so, because it takes a lot to set up a breakout room, depending on your age, but doesn't make any difference if it's AP biology or if it's fourth grade history, state history. They like those breakout rooms, and it's a great way to get at the content in a fun way and continue with the learning.
Absolutely. And it's funny because I do use, like, there are different activities that I do. I think I mentioned spoons as a game that I do, where students are matching and playing the game of spoons. Well, that game does take a long time to set up, and students will request, hey, are we going to play spoons again? I'm like, okay, we will, but we're not going to play it every single lesson. Because they do take time, like you said, to set up different activities, and the students only understand the experience of the activity and not necessarily the amount of time it takes us to set those things up. But the more things that you can build into your toolbox, the better, because then setting, and repeating isn't necessarily as long every single time once you've gotten it down. Charlotte says, I teach many bilingual adults at a homework-free school. Therefore, I don't see how I can use flipped learning. However, I record my theoretical explanations, which is beneficial for my students because they can rewatch the recordings, which is fantastic. Again, it's not necessarily that this is the model for every single teacher out there, but knowing the importance of, a recording is really important, because students do need to be able to rewatch at times and re-listen to their teachers who are explaining concepts, and have exposure again and again, or as often as they need. So that's a fantastic way of engaging them. And especially if you are in a homework-free environment, then, maybe more of a in-flipped model could be much more beneficial than assigning something outside of the traditional classroom school day. And I guess for me, a lot of times I don't necessarily view it as homework, because the traditional homework is that, application practice sort of piece, whereas this is more the instruction, and it's students taking ownership of their learning. Yes, they are doing it a lot of times at home, but I have students who will do it during a study hall, or during, some sort of activity period where they're allowed to do some schoolwork during that time. And so it teaches them how to prioritize their time and make sure that they're using time appropriately within their school day. So Lois says, I think a key component too is length of video. I try to limit to 10 minutes. Absolutely. The attention span, it's important to understand the attention span of your students and the age of those students and how long they can truly engage in watching a video. And you have to keep in mind, a lot of videos today are 30 seconds long that they're flipping through and scrolling through, that their videos are 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 30 seconds, and they have a hard time really focusing on something longer. And so even like a 15 or 20-minute video is just not going to work. And so understanding the age of your students, and it's usually, I want to say it's the age of your students +3. And Lois, correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure it's the age of your students +3 minutes is about the typical length that is like a max for them. And so, and Lois says, I think that's what I use. So that good. I'm glad I'm on the right, right train of thought with that one. That if you understand that your students, they're 6 or they're 10, and understanding that, their age +3, that's about max for them when it comes to instruction. And keeping that in the back of your mind, even if you are instructing during class, not to exceed that, because you've lost them beyond that. If you're doing a 20-minute lesson where you're trying to explain something, your students may not be able to really sit and process that information because their attention span is just not that long. You got to switch things up, have them doing a lot of those hands-on direct application discussion, so that there's not just this, I'm sitting in school and I'm so bored sort of mentalities. All right, let's take a quick look at AI and PBL. So artificial intelligence, when we break that down into what does that actually mean? It's machines that act like they're human. It's a level of human-like understanding and problem solving. So there are times when interacting with AI, you forget that you're talking to a computer and that you're not talking to an actual person or interacting with an actual person. But this is a machine that acts like or responds like a human would. So traditional education had a very heavy focus on memorization. We have to memorize all of these facts, and then we're going to test you on your ability to memorize those facts. Well, in PBL, it becomes more of a tool. AI is going to be seen as a tool for completing pieces and parts of a project. So it's not just about obtaining an answer. It is about, how do I explore a concept? How do I create something with this that I can create this piece or part for my project? So it allows us to be innovators, and it allows us to do things that maybe our own personal skill sets would hinder us from doing. So if I'm not a great artist, I can use AI to generate an image that is exactly what I need for my project so that things are communicated well. So like I said, it's a tool for innovation. The amount of knowledge within an AI tool is beyond that of one, I would say even one expert in a field. So it allows us to be imaginative and creative. So we can gather knowledge with this tool. We can be imaginative, and we can allow, beyond the sky. The stars are, beyond your imagination can go as far as it really wants to. I don't want to say the sky is the limit, because it's not. But it allows us to really be problem solvers and to really look at addressing problems in real ways that are meaningful to us. And the impossible all of a sudden becomes possible. As I said before, if I am not fantastic at drawing or painting, all of a sudden I can still do those things. I can still get the imagery that I want using an AI tool. So I can't is no longer a hurdle because there are tools out there that say that you can do those things. And we do have to leverage technology into a partnership. It has to be an integration into our classroom so that it's part of an immediate feedback loop. There are times when our students used to have to wait for their teacher to be able to address a question that they had. You know, the number of times I've stood in a classroom, there are 6 kids that have their hand up, and they're all waiting on me to come around and address their individual questions. Well, now they have a tool that they can ask that question to, get an immediate response, and that response, one, we have to teach them how to evaluate the accuracy of the response, because we do know that AI can produce inaccurate information. It can produce biased information. There are some issues with AI, but it's about teaching your students how to navigate those issues so that they can truly understand how to leverage this tool within the classroom environment. So one of the things I want to ask is, how do you see AI helping to nurture those higher order thinking skills in your classroom? What do you see as potential for artificial intelligence, knowing that it can give students immediate feedback? It can help address questions much more thoroughly, because there are times when we ask or we explain stuff to our students and they just don't get it. They can literally have the AI re-explain it to them. And then if they still don't get it, they can say, okay, can you explain that to me in more simple terms? And it will break down the concepts into more simple terms for them. And they can ask more specific questions about aspects of that topic that they don't understand. And it doesn't take away from Johnny, who's over here, and he gets it. It doesn't slow him down any, because we're working independently through a lot of what we're doing in our classroom. Lois says our AP Lit teacher uses AI to have students rethink about different responses to literature and then discuss in class. Absolutely. And that is one of the concerns, is AI use, especially in an English classroom or a writing classroom or a literature class, whatever that may be, because students could use it to cheat. They could say, I need you to write a 5-paragraph paper about this particular topic. But a lot of it is understanding what you want your students to do with it, and using the AI as a tool instead of something that produces an end. It should be producing pieces and parts to get you to an end. So proposing different responses to literature and then using those as talking points, all of a sudden it becomes a tool. It can share different perspectives on a topic. And that is a fantastic way of using AI within your classroom. So there are some different tools that we're going to look at to really help elevate how you're using AI in your classroom. This comes from Dan Fitzpatrick. This is a great acronym for when you're using ChatGPT. I use it for really any GPT that I'm working with. So, and I'll show you that a little bit later, but specifically ChatGPT, Dan came up with the acronym of prepare and edit. It started out as prep and edit, but it expanded to prepare and edit. So you develop your prompt, you introduce what you want the AI to do, then you give it a role and you'd say, this is your job, or this is the role that you have within this particular prompt. I want you to be an editor, or I want you to be a fifth grade fifth grade social studies teacher, and then be explicit in what you want it to do. Set the parameters of, I need this to be a multiple choice test, or I need you to generate, a 1,000 word response, whatever that may be. So you set parameters to it, and then you're going to tell it to ask you some follow-up questions, because what it originally generates may not necessarily be as specific as you need it to be for the task that you're doing. So for instance, if you wanted to create an immersive activity for your students to do, and you know that you are studying cell division, and you can tell it, I want you to create an immersive activity about cell division. You are a seventh grade science teacher, and I need this activity to do these various things. And the parameter could be, I need the activity to happen within 30 minutes. It needs to be a 30-minute activity. Please ask me some follow-up questions. And then ChatGPT will generate a basic response and then ask you some follow-up questions to be able to really enhance exactly what it is you're looking for. And then you can say, I need you to rate this particular experience that you've generated. And it'll rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. And sometimes it'll come back and say, you know what, this is like an 8 out of 10. Here are some different things that would improve it. And then you could say, okay, I would like for you to improve it based on your suggestions. And then it will do just that. It will generate an entirely new scenario for you to look at, and you can continue to engage in it just like you would in a conversation. So the edit part deals with the evaluation, determining, so you're going to evaluate the strength of the response, which is kind of what you do when you ask it to rate, but determine the accuracy. Does it really cover the cell division the way that it's been covered in class, or are there additional pieces of information that I need to give the AI to make that happen? So identify any misconceptions or biases within what it's generated, and then transform it so you can update it so it's in your language, it's in your format. So if you're going to be turning this in as part of lesson plans or something, you can transform it so that it's in an appropriate style and structure to meet your needs. Now, in PBL, this can be done through a slightly different acronym, which is, again, AI in PBL. So ask and innovate, plan, build, and learn. So in doing so, it teaches students to view AI as a tool. So when you're having students use this, and I would not be shy in telling your students that you're using AI within your classroom, because it shows you're going to be able to model for them how you want them to use it as well. So they view AI as a tool for exploration and expansion of curiosity, fosters a mindset geared towards discovery and inquiry. And you're not just looking for something quick and easy, but you really are using AI to help streamline a lot of the work that's being done. You can innovate, encourages students to apply AI creatively using technology for design. So students who may be struggling to come up with a project idea have the opportunity to really see AI as an opportunity to think outside the box. When I first started implementing or using AI in my classroom, one of the first things I looked at was research. And I knew my students hated research and they thought research was extremely boring. And so I just typed into ChatGPT and I said, what are some ways I can make research not boring for my students? And I said, I want it to be interactive. I want it to be collaborative. And I want students to be able to get up out of their seats and not just be sitting and staring at a computer. And that's when it really brought my attention to mind maps. And so it allowed me to think outside of my own experience because I was kind of at a loss. And so it gave me an idea that I was able to implement in my classroom truly the next day. And it was a game changer for how my students did their research. So it can help students plan, it can help you plan. When students are looking at a project and they're struggling to figure out how am I going to get this done, or they don't have great time management skills due to their age or because they've never really done this before. The AI can help plan out a project for them. It can say on day 1, do this, day 2, do this. So it can really help them navigate completing a project in a timely manner so that they can be as organized as possible. Build and learn. So again, it allows students to practically apply the technology. It's an extension of their capabilities, and it's used as a tool for building pieces and parts of the project itself. And the way in which students are going to learn will transform. The AI may not necessarily be where you want them to go first. You may want them to still have some dialogue with their peers, get some ideas, have that collaboration piece, but then they can use AI to identify and transform some aspects to really help them with some self-reflection and as well as really helping them to think critically about their projects as they're developing them and getting them to see various points of view or to really see how they can construct this in a much more meaningful way. So the AI is there as a support tool for students as they're going through their project. Now, here are some actual tools to look at: Magic School, EduAid, School AI, and CuraPod. And we're going to take a look at Magic School, EduAid, CuraPod, and then we'll dive into School AI at the end. And I realize that we're kind of running out of time, so we'll go through this as quickly as we can. Magic School, it's magicschool.ai, that's their web address. And it does contain a specific tool on their platform that is for PBL. It does help create like the bigger PBL unit, but it's going to need some modifications because students are going to be the ones who are directing their own projects. So it can give you a general idea of this would be a great project idea or setup, but then it's going to need some augmenting to really meet the standards of what the new modern PBL is for our students to make it really engaging for them and really meaningful for them. So this is kind of based on an older model of PBL, but again, so is EduAid's model. It's going to need some augmenting to really integrate that student interest and passion. So it does a very similar job to what Magic School does. And Magic School is phenomenal in what they offer. There's a lot of different AI tools within their platform. And EduAid has similar tools. But again, the PBL pieces and parts just need to be augmented to integrate student passion and interest. CuraPod, it's a great tool. It doesn't necessarily have a PBL component, but it's great at creating presentations. So when we go back to flipped learning and we're looking at, well, I need to, create lessons that will give me more time to work one-on-one with students or give my students more time to work on projects. CuraPod is a great way of creating those presentations that you need to give you more time. So it can create activities. It can help with collaboration. You can look at prior knowledge by doing surveys, and there's a lot of interaction on CuraPod by students. So it is a fantastic tool as an addition to your classroom, but it's not necessarily a tool that has PBL built into it. It can just enhance what you're already doing to give you more time for PBL. School AI, it does contain a PBL tool, but again, needs augmented for student interest and passions. But this is also a tool that's geared specifically for students. So if you can scan the QR code, or you can type in this address. This is a space that I actually have my students use so that they can interact with a chatbot. So they interact with AI to help them develop projects. And this is something where I can monitor how students use it. This is something I actually use in my classroom daily with students. And the other great aspect is if you have students who are ELL students, so they're English language learners, or English as a second language for them, then you can actually have the AI work in their native language. So if you start interacting in a language outside of English, it automatically will translate and flip into that language and start interacting with students in their native language, which then again helps propel them forward in their mastery of content and application of content, project ideas. And this particular tool is absolutely incredible because you can customize it to truly meet the needs of your classroom. So if you are studying, for instance, I was covering the decline of feudalism with my students. And this was one of the first times I had used school AI with my students, but we were looking at the decline of feudalism and the reasons for the decline. And I wanted my students just to, be introduced to working with a chatbot. And I had a student try to DoorDash food through the AI. And he asked if it could order him some like Taco Bell or something. And the AI responded, "You appear to be off task. Let's get back to the decline of feudalism." And I was like, oh my goodness, this is an absolute game changer because my students aren't able to get the AI off task. They're not able to distract it. So when they're engaging with it, it keeps them on task and focused on the topic that we're covering. And it's an impressive tool. I highly recommend that you check it out. There's a lot more that you can do with it than what I could even explain within an hour's time. So I do have PD that I give on school AI, but it is not something that we obviously will have enough time to cover here. So you can create these chat bots that are very specific for your students. And it's actually it's AI that's designed for students to use. So what opportunities and challenges do you foresee in bringing AI infused PBL in, to your students? And how can you promote ethical and responsible use of AI among students? That's one of the reasons why I love school AI is because it teaches students how to use the AI ethically. And that it's not just for fun and games, but it's a tool to help enhance their understanding of it. And you can tell your chatbots not to do certain things for your students. Like, I don't want you to write on behalf of my students. I would rather you ask questions. And so it will help teach students how to use AI appropriately within your class. Again, connecting with the community, this is a huge piece of PBL. It enhanced understanding and support for PBL when you can bring the community in and they can see what it is you're doing and how it is you're doing that with your students. It creates a more global perspective of the benefits of project-based learning within your classroom when we can bring the community in. It's also essential for ensuring a clear and cohesive understanding of expectations, both within and outside of the classroom setting. So I just want to address this real fast. Lois says, I use Magic School more for me, so for her as a teacher, and I use School AI more with the students. So absolutely, there are definitely various tools that are more specific to the audience. So there are a lot of tools within Magic School that are geared towards the teacher, whereas School AI is very student oriented in how students are using the AI. So when we're looking at community, it's going to offer a shared or foster a shared vision and collaboration between schools, families, and communities. The more people you can involve, the better, because all of a sudden everybody has they've got a hand in this. There's a reason for their participation. So when we can bring families into it, all of a sudden they understand why their child is being asked to do certain things and what the expectations are of their children in your classroom. It transforms PBL from a classroom-centered approach to a community-supported experience for your students. So it's not just about something that we do in class, but this involves a lot of other people, and it's going to be really, really helpful for them to see that this is a big picture strategy. It's not just about me sitting in a classroom completing an assignment. This is something that there are other people maybe who are counting on you, other people who are holding that student accountable for the work that they're doing. And one of the things that I did was I created an 18-page document, and you'll get this document, and it walks you through how to build partners within your community to really enhance your PBL classroom. Just a quick example, we were studying the Declaration of Independence. I think I brought this up last week, but we were studying the Declaration of Independence, and I was able to collaborate with the National Archives in Washington, D.C. And so students were able to partner with the National Archives as they were working through this document. They could send emails and really touch base with a larger entity than just my classroom or just the text that I was providing them. And so when we were studying the Constitution, looking at Article 1 of the Constitution, I said, who would be the best person or best group to talk to my students about this topic? And I was like, well, I would say the U.S. Capitol. And so I sent an email to the U.S. Capitol, and I figured, the worst thing they can do is say, no, we're not interested in, but it turned out that they said yes. And we were one of the first schools that they had ever collaborated with in the entire country. And we helped them start their partnership with schools. And so my students were then able to Skype with the U.S. Capitol and work with them as they studied various aspects of the Constitution. And so a lot of it is just thinking through, who do I want my students to work with? Who would be an asset to my classroom to enhance their projects and what they're doing? So this particular document really walks you through that. So the last question that I'll leave you with is, how has your understanding of project-based learning grown or changed throughout this series? To really think through the 3 parts that series that we've done, how has your understanding of project-based learning grown or changed throughout this? So I want to thank you for your time that you've given to this series. I hope it has been beneficial for you, And I am going to take this document that has links to everything. And I will put that in the chat. And there you go. So you should have access to every document that was talked about in the presentation. There's also a survey in there if you wouldn't mind taking that. I always appreciate the feedback so I can figure out how to grow and be reflective myself. And again, thank you for being a part of this. I really appreciate it.